Super Mario Odyssey has now been out for almost 7 years, and while some of you may know parts and pieces of its world record progression, the story this game has crafted over the last 7 years is nothing short of incredible. So I think it's finally time that we went through the great lengths of capturing the full history of what might possibly be Mario's most iconic speedrun. This is the history of Super Mario Odyssey World Records. Just a few years after Odyssey's release, people had thought the game was dead, but these people couldn't have been any more wrong. But before we get to that crucial point in time, I have a quick word from today's sponsor, which is Manscaped. As someone who has known about Manscaped for a long time, I was honestly surprised when I tried out their new Lawnmower 5.0 Ultra. While Manscaped has a range of wonderful products, this new lawnmower has taken grooming precision to a whole new level with their next-gen dual skin-safe blade heads, which are accompanied with an upgraded trimmer blade and an interchangeable foil blade. While the trimmer blade starts the job with its clean-cut moves, the foil blade swoops in to finish the job, leaving you with a fresh cut and smoother skin. The trimmer even comes with LED lights, which help to navigate those tricky spots no matter who you are. Not to mention that the trimmer is still waterproof and it has a long-lasting charge. Head over to manscaped.com/Anto or use my promo code ANTO to get 20% off plus free international shipping at checkout. And finally, people were not lying when they said that your balls, well, thank you. To no one's surprise, this new 3D Mario platformer did not disappoint and was met with critical acclaim across every major video game reviewing company. One of the reasons for this mass critical acclaim was Mario's moveset. Through clever use of this moveset, players would find seemingly impossible secrets such as these coins in Sand Kingdom or these coins in Darker Side. Essentially, the game would almost always reward you for stepping way outside of the box, which not only paved the way for some sensational moments, but it partially served as a catalyst for a question that the Odyssey community has now been trying to answer for the last 7 years. How fast could you beat the entire game? It's a simple question, but if you know anything about speedrunning, you'll know that the answer is always complicated. With that being said, people were already working towards the answer to this question on the day of Odyssey's release, and the person to come on top would be Monkey King Hero with a time of 1:53:46. Since it had only been a day since Odyssey was available to the public, you can bet that this world record was nothing more than a fast casual playthrough of the game that would get beaten to a pulp over the course of the next few weeks. Every day, there would be a new world record, with some days seeing multiple world records. Among all the players who were grinding Odyssey at the time, Tendo would have a streak of dominance, bringing the world record all the way down to a 1:18:15 a week after the game had come out. The very next week, Valu, who was already a legendary speedrunner, began to dominate the leaderboards, and he brought the world record all the way down to a 1:10:43. How had the world record already gotten so low, even though there hadn't been any notable glitches discovered yet? Well, to answer that question, we need to understand both how Mario's moveset operates alongside how the any percent run operates. Any percent simply means beating the game as fast as possible under any means possible. The game is considered to be beaten after you defeat Bowser in Moon Kingdom, and the actual speedrun ends when you exit this wire at the end of the escape sequence in Moon Kingdom. Getting to the Moon Kingdom means that you have to go through 13 other kingdoms first, and each of these kingdoms have a certain amount of moons you need to collect before moving on to the next kingdom. If you include the kingdoms you unlock after you beat the game, there are 880 moons to collect, but about half of these moons are locked behind these moon rocks, which are only accessible in Odyssey's post-game. But since you only need to collect 124 total moons to unlock Moon, most kingdoms have the luxury of speedrunners being able to entirely skip the kingdom's main missions. For example, in Sand Kingdom, a casual player would usually do these 2 story moons to unlock this inverted pyramid, and from there, they would fight this boss, which would then unlock this entire underground section with another boss. If you were to do all of this fast, it would still end up taking around 10 to 15 minutes, because there are a lot of unskippable cutscenes and animations, not to mention that doing a 2-minute boss fight or challenge is not worth 1 moon when you can easily collect a plethora of moons in that same time period. With some good routing, you are able to skip some of, if not all of the slow story moons in each kingdom, which is where a lot of the time save was at in the first 2 weeks of Odyssey's release. In conjunction with the moon routes comes Mario's moveset, as his moveset not only allows for some of the route to be possible in the first place, but it allows the route to be optimized to its fullest potential. In addition to your classic backflips, side flips, dives, and triple jumps, we now also had rolling, which if done with motion controls allows for you to cross most distances in a timely manner. Then there's Cappy, who essentially has his own moveset in addition to Mario's already complex moveset. Not only can you bounce off of Cappy to gain height and distance, but you can also do homing cap throws, up throws, and spin throws with Cappy, all of which help you save time in their own unique ways. You can also do down throws if you're playing on Joy-Cons, but these don't really save any time as far as any percent is concerned. And we can't forget about the actual captures themselves, as they are present all throughout the run. Cappy's moveset, Mario's moveset, the captures, and the route are 4 out of the 5 foundations for an Odyssey world record. The 5th and final foundation would be none other than the glitches and tricks. While Valu's 11043 didn't contain any glitches, it did contain some pretty neat tricks and even some sequence breaks. At the end of Cap Kingdom, Valu fights Topper, but after he gets the first hit, he immediately stomps on the hat Topper is in, as opposed to waiting for Topper to pop out of his hat. Valu would then use similar strategies for the other 3 Brutals, whether it be hitting Spirit before he starts spewing poison everywhere, hitting Rango before he starts jumping around the arena, or hitting Harriet with her bombs before she starts flying around the arena. In Cascade Kingdom, you're supposed to go through this 2D section to get to the top of the kingdom where the Madame Brood boss fight is, but if you capture this dinosaur and bounce off of this trampoline, you are able to go straight to the boss fight and save a minute. In Sand Kingdom, you are supposed to go through this underground section to make it up to this treasure moon with the Jaxi, but Valu skips all of that with a bullet bill and a well-timed wall jump, making this treasure moon a quick one to collect. In Lost Kingdom, Klepto is supposed to take your hat away, but if you do a triple jump off of this tree to this part of the kingdom and then go to these stairs where you would usually defeat Klepto, what will happen is that the game will be tricked into thinking that Klepto already has your hat, so now you are able to go wherever you want in Lost Kingdom without the Klepto sequence triggering itself. This in itself saved upwards of a minute. In Metro Kingdom, a faster way of getting to the boss fight was discovered. It involved jumping up this awning, which would then put you at the top of this building. From there, you could not only route in this moon, but you could quickly hop from building to building to get to the city hall and ultimately the Mecha Wiggler boss fight, as opposed to the alternative, which was a lot of slow dilly-dallying. In Bowser's Kingdom, Valu cleanly executes a faster version of the mech boss fight. Instead of waiting to poke the mech's bombs with the Pokio, he skips capturing the Pokio entirely by climbing up the mech's leg. Once he ground pounds the first bubble, he dives back onto the mech and stays on it so that he can ground pound the other bubbles. In Moon Kingdom, it was discovered that you could skip the entire moon cave by doing this cat bounce followed up by these wall jumps. While this trick was at the end of the run, it wasn't too difficult, and at the time, a few failed attempts didn't hurt, considering that this easily saves minutes in comparison to going through the moon cave. In just a week, Valu had brought the world record down from a 1:18:51 all the way down to a 1:10:43. This 1:10 contained a handful of mistakes, but it was clear that Valu was onto something magical here. He was already a speedrunning legend, having held world records in Super Mario 3D World and the Super Mario Galaxy games, among many other impressive times to his name. But right behind Valu were 2 more speedrunning juggernauts. One had held world records in Super Mario Sunshine, while the other had held world records in various Zelda titles. These players were respectively Samurai 1Man and Iwabi74. Just one day after Valu's record, Iwabi would get a new record of 1:10:22, but Valu would quickly clap back with a new world record. But this wasn't just a new world record, it was an improvement by over a minute. There were no new big discoveries. Valu had simply saved time over Iwabi in every single kingdom as a result of cleaner movement, with the exception of Bowser's kingdom, in which he lost about 20 seconds to the Harriet boss fight. Had this gone right, he would have been the first to get a 108. It was now the middle of November, and Valu, Samurai One Man, and Iwabi were all doing attempts in the hopes of getting the first ever 108. People had their money on Iwabi or Valu since they were significantly closer to it than Samurai was, so naturally, Samurai got a new world record of 108.48. This run was 20 seconds behind Valu, entering the last two kingdoms, but thanks to a clean Harriet fight alongside a cleaner endgame overall, he was able to absolutely crush the world record. With it now being the middle of November, Mario Odyssey speedrunning had truly become a spectacle. All of these runners were averaging hundreds of viewers while doing attempts, and if someone was on world record pace, then thousands of people would flood into the person's stream to catch the record live. The three speedrunners would continue cleaning up the run, with Iwabi getting the first ever 107 just 9 days after the first 108. But by the end of November, there was a new world record, and it wasn't by Iwabi, it wasn't by Samurai, and it wasn't by Valu. This player went by the name of NDS, which is backwards for Shaden, and Shaden had seemingly come out of nowhere, beating Iwabi's record by 15 seconds. Valu would once again clap back with a low 107, but after that, Shaden would start to dominate the game, getting times that were leagues better than even second place. Before Shaden's first world record, no one had any idea who he was. His account online was fresh, and he had no history or background unlike the other three speedrunners. When situations like these happen, they usually call for some sort of investigation, because someone unknown getting a world record like this out of nowhere is usually seen as suspicious by community members. I'm not saying that a new person with little experience can't get a world record, but when the last three players were all speedrun veterans, it definitely raised some eyes within the community. After some investigation, two things were found. The first thing was that Shaden's runs were completely legitimate, and there was no doubt about it. The second thing was that Shaden had a past account that went under the name of Pydoix, and Pydoix was the best Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time speedrunner in the entire world. He had gotten multiple world records in Ocarina of Time in 2013, and in that same year, he had just completely vanished from the internet and speedrunning altogether. But because of Odyssey, he was back under the username of Shaden.
That was pretty good. Still want that 105. Alright, I got the 105 I wanted. Alright. Gotta get that 104 next.
Shaden had brought the world record all the way down to a low 105 in the span of just 2 weeks. An up-and-coming player by the name of Nigrovita would tie his time not long afterwards, but other than that, Shaden was becoming the undisputed champion of Odyssey. The most impressive part about all of this was that there weren't any new glitches or big tricks discovered during this time period, except for one. Shaden would be one of the first players to start utilizing Odyssey's more advanced techniques, whether it be motion controlled throws with Cappy or spin pounds, which are essentially faster but more complicated ground pounds, as you have to rotate your entire analog stick for a spin and then quickly followed it up with the inputs of a ground pound. But there was one more technique implemented into every top level runner's arsenal, and that was the roll cancel. If you press the jump button and the cap throw button at the same time while in the middle of a roll, you will be able to exit the roll without losing any speed. This was insanely useful because beforehand, players would either just let go of the crouch button to get out of a roll, or they would long jump out of a roll, which was even slower. With the roll cancel, you not only preserved the speed from the rolls, but you were also able to effectively change your direction, not to mention that you could combine the roll cancel with other movement techniques such as the cap return, which gives your jump a boost in height upon execution. But the roll cancel had one more use. If you were on a sloped surface and did a roll cancel against a wall, Mario would clip straight through it. Later on, it would be discovered that there are certain walls you could roll cancel through even if there was no sloped surface, but these walls are merely special cases as they are either poorly designed or there's some other property at play. Regardless, a lot of roll cancels were not useful as far as any percent is concerned, but one would be implemented here in Sand Kingdom. Speedrunners would talk to the Sphinx so that they could get this treasure chest moon, and then after that they would sink all the way down in the sand to get this moon before continuing on with the rest of the route. But if you did this roll cancel on top of the Sphinx, specifically on the left side of the Sphinx's back, in which there is this sloped curvature, then you could clip straight through the wall, and then dive straight into the loading zone that leads you to the treasure chest moon. When Shaden got his first world record time of 107.39, he was the first person to get a world record with Sphinx clip, even though players hadn't even fully understood how to make the trick consistent yet. Nonetheless, a first try Sphinx clip saved almost 10 seconds, so it was most certainly worth going for, especially at a world record level. During the same time period, two more notable strategies were implemented into runs. In Cloud Kingdom, players would usually wait for Bowser to throw out his hat before collecting it, but if you did a jump and cap throw while Bowser was in the middle of throwing out his hat, then you are able to collect it in midair like this and get straight to punching him as opposed to collecting the hat farther away like this. This in itself saved 10 seconds, but since you also fight Bowser in Moon Kingdom, you get an additional 10 seconds of time save for doing fast hats there as well. In Metro Kingdom, there's this moon that players would get with the RC car, but it was discovered that if you got on the scooter and then tilted your controller, what would happen is that the scooter's hitbox would extend itself ever so slightly. So if you drive by this cage while tilting the controller, then the hitbox is barely able to reach the moon, allowing for you to collect it, which saves a few seconds over the RC car. 104 was on the horizon, and since Shaden was still actively playing the game, already having been the first to get a 105 and 106, it seems as if he was going to be the first to break this new minute barrier as well. In a time where the game was seeing a world record almost every day, Shaden was so far ahead of everyone at the time that it took someone almost an entire month to beat his world record. While Nicro had tied Shaden, the first person to actually beat him would be none other than Valu, who'd get the first ever 104 alongside the first world record of 2018. Going into Luncheon Kingdom, Valu was already 23 seconds ahead of Shaden. He could have very easily played it safe to secure the world record, but instead he went for a new trick that had just been discovered. Getting this moon in Luncheon was a huge pain, as you'd have to use this pan bro to break open these cheese blocks that contain the lever that gives you access to this moon. But if you put this turnip right next to the moon's barrier and then drop the pan bro in between the barrier and turnip, what will happen is that the pan bro will get pushed inside the barrier, allowing you to collect the moon. Naturally, Shaden would immediately learn this trick and take the world record back from Valu the very next day. But at this point, Shaden would only do any percent if the world record got taken away from him, since he was still invested in doing 2P runs with Icatrix, so once again, it would take a few weeks for everyone to catch up to him. This time, Nicro would be the first to dethrone Shaden, but within the same day, Shaden sniped the world record back from him. 1 week later, one speedrunner would get on an absurd run. They were already 15 seconds ahead of the record with time to save in the second half. In Snow Kingdom, they got a gold split, meaning that was the best they'd ever completed that kingdom. Even though they lost some time in Luncheon, they were now 25 seconds ahead of the record going into the final two kingdoms. Under this type of pressure, you'd expect some time loss as a result of nerves, but instead, this runner got a gold split again, this time in Bowser's, and then closed out the run with a 104.20, completely demolishing Shaden's record.
Alright. Dude, 420! Hey, 420!
This record was so good that it would stand for an entire month, which is the longest a record had stood thus far. 103 was possible, but unless there was a new strategy found, then it was looking like this was going to be the record for a while. But then Shaden came back, and without any big discoveries, he'd not only get the record, but he'd also get the first 103. He had managed to not only clean up all the mistakes in Nicro's record, but he had also managed to have cleaner and faster faster movement throughout the entire run, even if his run had a few small flaws of its own. Shaden would then cut another 11 seconds off of his own record just 3 days later, but after this 103.47, Shaden would disappear, just like how he did in 2013 with Ocarina of Time. 6 years later, and no one in the Odyssey community really knows what he's up to, but I'd like to think that he is thriving in real life while secretly being a world record holder in a different game. The previous world record holders would also start to move away from Mario Odyssey any percent, but don't be mistaken about this game's activity. Despite the first generation of Odyssey runners straying away, a new generation would come and pave the way for a golden era. Nitro would continue to bring the world record down through the months of March and April, getting a time of 103.16 before Suisaga would get his first world record with a time of 103.14. The both would continue to optimize their movement, and on the same day Sui got his first world record, Nitro would get on a world record run of his own. It was 102 pace into the very last section of the game, but because Equan said it was a 103 flat, it ended up being a 103 flat. While movement optimizations would continue to persevere, a new trick that saved almost 20 seconds was discovered. Upon collecting this first moon in Cascade Kingdom, you are plunged into this long cutscene followed by another cutscene before you are able to get to this dino. If you try to skip this first moon, you'll be met with this invisible wall, but if you do a vault on top of this rock followed up by some well-timed movement, then you're able to just barely go over the invisible wall. Later on, people found out that it was actually faster to bypass the wall by going under and around it like this, but for now, this was the primary method of doing the trick, and it was working wonders when it came to bringing the record down. Just 3 days after the 103 flat, Nitro would get the first ever 102 with a time of 102.48. This run would have stood for a long time, but there would be another trick discovered that would once again save another 20 seconds, and this time, Sui would be the first to learn and implement it into runs. In just about every kingdom, there are these moons that are only supposed to be accessible via these paintings, but naturally, players would find ways of reaching these moons without the painting. In Snow Kingdom, the last moon players would get before warping to the Odyssey was this secret moon. It was slow, but it was really the only option. That was until it was discovered that you could actually make it to the painting moon in Snow with a tight vault from the top of the Odyssey. When this jump was done for the first time, people thought that it would be nearly impossible to make it consistent, but what people didn't know at the time was that there was ways to make tight jumps like these much more consistent. By delaying your rainbow spin, you're able to prolong your time in the air, making the jump much more doable. Furthermore, the use of vectoring also helped to prolong your time in the air, which if you don't know what vectoring is, it's fancy terminology for moving at an angle or side to side. With both the delayed rainbow spin alongside the power of vectoring, Sui was able to consistently nail the trick in his runs, allowing for him to bring the record all the way down to a 102.30. Around the same time, another time save was found in Sand Kingdom. By long jumping off of this edge, you're able to spawn this bullet bill. If you do an up throw and then quickly collect this moon while still holding out Cappy, you'll be able to home into the bullet bill and essentially warp yourself up here without having to spend the 5 to 6 seconds climbing up. Dram55, who is the person that discovered this strat, specifically asked people not to name the strat after him, so naturally, the community not only coined this as the Dram strat, but the previous trick I just showed you would be coined as Snow Dram, despite him having no involvement with the discovery or implementation of that trick whatsoever. Come the beginning of June, and Nitro would finally take the world record back from Sui, getting a time of 102.19. This was once again another solid Nitro world record that would remain untouched for quite some time. 101 was possible, but the margins for error were starting to become super thin, not to mention that Nitro had to start preparing for Summer Games Done Quick, which is the biggest speedrunning event in the entire world. At this event, Nitro was going to fly all the way to America from Ontario, Canada to show his any percent skills to the masses, but there was just one problem with Nitro being at this event, and that was the fact that while he was away, one of Odyssey's biggest discoveries would be made. Odyssey had now been out for almost an entire year, and while a lot of routes had seen some type of change, wooded Kingdom had surprisingly remained rather stagnant. This was about to change though, as a new roll cancel clip was going to be implemented into the route. After getting this nut moon, you'd go up to this rock and perform a roll cancel on it. Once out of bounds, you could then make your way over to this slither of land, and from there, you could collect this moon without using the tank. Usually, collecting this moon out of bounds like this would cause you to soft lock inside of the little box the moon is in, but if you collect the moon by touching the very bottom of its hitbox, then you'll be able to stay out of bounds and ultimately make your way up to this part of the stage. This would once again be a dead end under normal circumstances, but with some speed and a lot of jumps, you are able to make it all the way up without a rocket flower and get this moon. From there, the route continues on as normal, and if you do all of that perfectly, you'd be looking at around 15 seconds of time save. But Rock Clip would never see the light of day because an entirely new trick was discovered by accident. Robin Cyrix, who was practicing Night Metro for a speedrun, collected this moon and accidentally did a cap throw facing the wall as he was backflipping to collect it. In doing these inputs, the moon had pushed him out of bounds, creating for a useless clip. While this clip was useless in Metro, the moon clip would quickly begin to immortalize itself throughout the run, whether it be this clip in Cascade that saved a second, or this one in Snow that saved a few seconds. The best part about this trick was that while you only had one try to do it, there was a decent amount of leniency when it came to the timing of actually getting the clip. On the same day of this discovery, it was also found that moon clips were also possible with a triple jump, but these were much more difficult, not to mention that there weren't any that could be implemented into the any percent route. But one moon clip made its way into the any percent route, and this moon clip saved a lot more time over the ones in Snow and Cascade Kingdom. Using this nut moon, you could clip straight out of bounds and almost instantaneously make your way to the tank moon. Not only was this easier than rock clip, but this was much faster. While an optimal rock clip would save 15 seconds, this saved closer to 30. Since Nitro was at GDQ, he was unable to learn and do attempts with the new moon clips, which gave Sui the perfect opportunity to demolish Nitro's 102.19. Ever since Odyssey's conception, there was one question that was on the mind of a lot of community members. Was it actually possible to beat the entire game in under an hour? Well, if you've kept up with Odyssey speedrunning, then you know that the answer is yes, but during this time, the community had come to a consensus that the any percent run was starting to become absurd. Not only were these tricks starting to pile up, but runners were making way less movement errors. But don't take it from me though, take it from all of these people instead.
Not possible. Let me just say it's not. Humans cannot get sub out. We're just not gonna do it. In theory, yes, it's possible, but I don't think so. I don't know. I don't see it happening.
Sub hour's not gonna happen. Like literally, it will never happen.
Sub-hour is impossible, guys, so, I mean, there's no way anyone could get sub-hour. It's literally impossible, guys.
Around this same time, a massive project was being put together by the Odyssey community. On this sheet, the any percent route was segmented into hundreds of segments. If you clicked on the link for a segment, it would be footage of the fastest time anyone has ever completed that segment. So once the community had gathered the fastest time for each segment, which keep in mind, some segments did things that were way outside the scope of even a world record run, the community was then able to edit and compile them all into one video. The final result was a segmented run that was completed in 59 minutes and 32 seconds. Sub-hour was barely possible, even when the run was split into hundreds of segments, so it was safe to say that we weren't going to see anyone break the sub-hour mark anytime soon. 2 weeks after Sui's 101, Nitro would take the record back, but 5 days later, Lil Curbs would snipe the world record. But after a few months of grinding, Nitro had brought the world record all the way down to a 101.07. 100 was possible, but would he be the first to get it? Would it be the up-and-coming Lil Curbs? Would Sui come back to break another minute barrier? Well, it would actually be another runner who goes by the name of Chaos Springle.
Yeah!
Once Chaos got his 100.58, he would go on a rampage, getting one world record.
I split! What the fuck?
After another.
Fuck yes! Woo! I fucking did it!
After another.
Let's fucking go, dude! Give me that shit!
The most impressive part about Chaos's world records were how close he was able to play to his SOB, which is an abbreviation for Sum of Best. Your Sum of Best combines your best split or gold split in each kingdom, and when you combine all of Chaos's golds together, you'd get a time of 100.15, meaning that if Chaos played perfectly for his skill level, that he'd get a time of 100.15. The world record was a 100.41, which means that throughout a run that is a whole hour long, he only lost 26 seconds to his SOB, meaning that he lost an average of 1.5 seconds per kingdom. While Chaos would go for safer strats, he had consistency that was simply unmatched at the time, as most top level runners would play within 30 seconds to a minute of their SOB, while Chaos was consistently able to play within 20 to 30 seconds of his SOB, which made him a very dominant world record holder. But since we were now less than a minute away from sub hour, a lot of top level players started adding sub splits, which means that there were now splits under each kingdom split. For example, in Cascade Kingdom, there would now be a split for FMS, the Madame Brood boss fight, and the rest of the kingdom, as opposed to just one Cascade split. This way, they could focus more on optimizations within each section of the kingdom. Players would also do ILs, or individual level runs, meaning that they would do timed runs of each kingdom to see how fast they could bring each kingdom down. Then, if they wanted to, they could put these times into their SOB, which also aided in giving a better idea of what a perfect run would look like. Despite sub hour only being 42 seconds away, it still seemed impossible, but when world record holders needed the community most, they came through with some discoveries that did not disappoint. Discoveries that would make sub hour just barely possible for a human being, and the first of these discoveries would be in Lake Kingdom. After players get this zipper moon, they'd make their way underwater to collect a few moons before fighting Rango for the last 3 moons. However, there was an insane alternative to this route. This corner in the wall has a few pixels in which Mario is able to squeeze right through it. So if you use Cappy to line up the clip and then rolled forward with Mario, you could clip ever so slightly out of bounds. From here, you could do a ground pound followed up by a cap bounce, which leads you to this invisible wall that you can do a wall jump off of, allowing for you to make it all the way to this chest moon. This in itself is useless, but if you do a homing up throw after your wall jump, you're able to collect this checkpoint in which you could then warp to this painting moon after collecting the chest moon. If you continued on with this route and then ended off the kingdom by talking to this fish lady, you could just warp straight to the Odyssey, since there were now 3 individual moons routed in that replaced the 3 moons you'd otherwise collect from Rango. There was just one caveat to this trick though, and that was the fact that it was precise and only saved about 5 seconds when done on the first try. While Chaos had quickly implemented this trick into his runs, Equan, who had been a top level player for a while now, was the first to get a new world record with the trick, getting a time of 100.38. This would be Equan's only record, but to put into perspective how insane he was at the game, he would get early games that were 10 seconds better than everyone else, and then proceed to complain about how they could have been more optimal. He didn't do any secret big tricks, he had simply mastered early game, going for every small strategy he could think of. He very well could have been the first person to get sub hour, since his early game was already leagues ahead of everyone else, but alas, he fell ever so slightly behind when it came to the rest of the run. Chaos would come back, and on January 8th of 2019, he'd get a time of 100.24. Booyah! In Seaside Kingdom, there was another 5-second time save discovered, but unlike Lake Clip, this new trick could be pulled off by a beginner. If you place the Cheep Cheep in this spot, uncaptured, and then recaptured, you could clip the Cheep Cheep through the floor. You could then swim all the way down and do a shake, which allows for your hitbox to extend enough to collect this moon while staying out of bounds, and from there, you can access the loading zone that leads you to this room with a treasure chest without answering the Sphinx question. In Sand Kingdom, there would once again be an upgrade to the Sphinx clip route. After getting this moon, you could ground pound and just barely make it up to this part of the stage, and from there, you could collect this crate moon while you were on your way to the bullet bill moon, which saved about 4 seconds over collecting the crate moon after Dram. This sequence of movement was arguably as complex, if not more complex, than the late clip out of bounds movement, not to mention that messing it up would mean that you would miss the bird moon you'd have to get later on in the kingdom, so there was really no room for error here. All throughout February, the world record would drop drop, with Nitro getting a 1:00:09 on the 21st. With there being only 10 seconds left to shave off, the race for sub-hour was on, but then just one day later, someone would get on sub-hour pace. With a best possible time of 59:55 going into Bowser's, it was looking like this was shaping out to be the first ever sub-hour. This run had barely seen any mistakes, with there only being a few seconds lost here and there, but what was even more impressive about this run was that it didn't even have late crate. Unfortunately, they would mess up this ogre, which killed sub-hour, or at least that's what people thought, because they had played the rest of Bowser's perfectly, meaning that their best possible time going into Moon was just barely a 59:59.
I literally beat the game in an hour.
Lil Curbs had beaten the game in exactly 1 hour. The breaking of this milestone was bound to happen any day, but for the next month, the world record stayed at a 1 flat. Multiple people had gotten close, just like Lil Curbs, but nonetheless, nobody was able to keep it together on sub-hour pace. But right as March was coming to a close, one of the top players would finally break through.
Yes, dude. Yes. Yes. Fuck yes. Fuck yes, dude. Fuck this shit. Holy fucking shit. Let's fucking go.
You remember how I said there came a point in Mario Odyssey's history where players thought that the game was dead? This very moment was that point in time. The race to sub-hour was over, and with that came the hype around the game itself fizzling out. 58 was technically possible, but there was no way that was going to happen anytime soon. And even if it did become possible, there simply just wasn't as much excitement about breaking that minute barrier in comparison to sub-hour. Less than 24 hours after Nitro got his sub-hour, a Japanese player who was all the way in 5th place would jump all the way up to the top of the leaderboard, getting a time that was just milliseconds slower than Nitro, but nonetheless was still a sub-hour. But just 1 week later, Chaos would not only get his first sub-hour, but he would dethrone Nitro by a second. Within that following month, Chaos would get 3 more world records, but they were all 59:57s. Other than the seconds that were left to be squeezed out of Chaos's world record, any percent did not have much going for it anymore, and it was understandable as to why the hype was dying down. But on April 25th of 2019, Mario Odyssey would take a completely unexpected turn. Up until this point, Odyssey only had 3 main versions: 1.0, 1.1, and 1.2. Every top runner played on 1.0 of the game because Sphinx Clip, Turnip Clip, and FMS were all patched on the subsequent versions of the game. But with the release of 1.3, there were 2 tweaks to the game that changed any percent forever. The first change was that there were now these Luigi hint arts scattered throughout the game. Each hint art gives 200 coins, which is insanely useful because you need a few hundred coins throughout the run so that you can buy these shop moons. The second tweak was that the game's loads were much faster to the point where 1.3 was now the fastest version to run the game on, despite a few of the game's tricks being patched. While 1.3 was a nice update to the game, a lot of speedrunners and community members viewed this change negatively, which was understandable since 3 of the game's big tricks had been removed. Some top players quit running the game entirely because of this change, but since the world record was no longer safe, you can bet that other players were more than excited to take advantage of this opportunity. On May 3rd, Goryuya would get the first 1.3 world record, starting off strong with a time of 59:46. Just a few days later, Chaos would squeeze out a record of his own, but what made this particular run impressive was the fact that Chaos was 15 seconds behind Goryuya out of Metro. So if you combined Goryuya's first half with Chaos's second half, then we'd be looking at a time of 59:31. After Chaos got his 59:46, he would continue to do attempts, and within the same session, he'd get another world record. But instead of it being another small record cut, it was a 59:31. 59.35. The craziest part about this run was that Chaos was still 11 seconds behind Goryuya out of Metro, which meant that there was still a lot of room for improvement. But the only problem here is that the second half of the run was second to none. Coming out of Metro, Chaos had a best possible time of 59.31, which means that for the next 30 minutes, he only lost 4 seconds. Even if Chaos didn't have golds that were as optimized as Goryuya or other players, this level of consistency, even in the modern Odyssey speedrunning scene, is simply unheard of.
Is this a dream?
A month would pass, and while Chaos was still on top, 2 players were quickly rising to the top of the leaderboard as well. The first player was Mitch, who had just gotten a time of 59.38, and the second player was Tyrone18, who had just gotten a 59.39. Both players were ahead of the record out of Metro, but unsurprisingly, they fell short in the second half of the run. On the flip side, they had something that Chaos didn't, and that was more strategies in their arsenal. But what exactly were these strategies, and where did they come from? Well, you remember that segmented run that clocked in at a 59.32? That was the BTT, or best theoretical time, in which you could beat the entire game in the middle of 2018. By the end of 2018, a second BTT was released, with the final time clocking in at a 58.20. But in the same month, Chaos got his 59.34, a third BTT was released, and this time, the final time was a 57.32. Since the BTT was always at least 2 minutes ahead of the world record, it became a very powerful frame of reference for players such as Tyrone and Mitch. For every moon that was done in the world record, there was most likely a faster and more difficult strategy for doing said moons in the BTT, even if these strategies barely saved any time. If Tyrone and Mitch could add enough of these optimizations, then they would finally have an edge on Chaos.
Chaos is dead, boys! Oh my god!
Chaos had finally been dethroned, and the person to do it would be Tyrone. The very next day, Chaos would take the world record back and keep it for another month. Then on July 8th, Chaos would once again improve the world record by a second, but this time, Chaos wouldn't hold the record for very long. Mitch had gotten his first world record, and without any new time saves, he had beaten it by an entire 16 seconds. This was easily the most impressive record the game had ever seen up until this point. While this run was insanely impressive, there were some pretty notable mistakes, such as this one in Night Metro. Moments like these proved that 58 could be achieved by a top level runner, so long as they cut down on any time loss. While strategy optimization and mistake minimization were both crucial for cutting down on the record, there was one more key component when it came to these new records, and this key component would be none other than the execution. Execution can be used to describe a lot, but when I say execution, I'm talking about the speed in which inputs are being pressed. For example, let's take a look at these two spin pounds. You'll notice that the one on the right is a tad bit faster. This in itself only saves a few frames, but if you are able to consistently do that faster spin pound, then frames quickly compound into seconds over the course of an entire run. The same logic can be applied to dives, jumps, or really any sequence of movement. Execution played a huge role in cutting the record down by so much, and going forward, it will continue to play a role in progressing the record. Execution is also part of the reason as to why the BTT is always minutes ahead of the record, as players will grind segments for hours as a means of achieving top-notch execution. Up until this point, the longest a single record had stood for was 32 days. Come September of 2019, and Mitch had effectively doubled that number. But since it had now been over 2 months, players were starting to catch up, and right behind Mitch was Tyrone with a time of 59.16. While Tyrone was still short of the record, his 59.16 was on pace to destroy Mitch out of luncheon. With the best possible time of 58.56 upon entering Ruined, the potential for a new record, let alone 58, was undeniable at this point. On September 18th, Tyrone would finally beat Mitch, getting a time of 59.09. The only caveat caveat here is that Tyrone lost 12 seconds in Luncheon alone, so while it was a new record, he was unsatisfied and kept pushing for 58. By the end of September, Tyrone and Mitch both got 59.05s, but Mitch was on top by less than a hundredth of a second. On the 1st of October, Tyrone had a best possible time of 58.57 entering Moon, but once again, it would be another 59.0x world record. Chaos was the first 100, and Nitro was the first 59, so who was going to be the first to get 58? After countless chokes, the first ever 58 had finally happened, and Tyrone was the man to do it. But if there's one thing that you should know about these top runners, it's that they don't stop when a new minute barrier is broken. They stop when they are done. Just 2 days after the 58.59, the record had now dropped to a 58.47. This run was absurd, with the only real notable mistake being in Bowser's Kingdom. While Mitch would get a 58 of his own, Tyrone would put down any percent. In his own words, he had killed the category, and so it was on to other endeavors. Another player, who goes by the alias of Stravos96, was right behind Mitch and Tyrone with a time of 59.00, but as he was closing in on the record, he too would put the game down. Tyrone was the undisputed champion of any percent, and for the rest of 2019, his record would stand. Right after Tyrone got his 58.47, something remarkable happened. A player was simply just messing around in Cascade Kingdom and ended up accidentally landing on this tiny slither of ground. Once people heard about this, they immediately went to KFR, or Koopa freerunning, as being able to replicate this trick in KFR would almost certainly allow for Hamadou's 13.84 to fall. Come October 27th, and Hey There would beat Hamadou's world record by almost an entire second, which is unheard of when it comes to KFR. That same day, the record would be beaten 8 more times. It was clear that this trick was useful in KFR, but what about in any percent? Well, when it came to getting up to the Madame Brood boss fight, players would skip a lot of the kingdom by using this dinosaur and trampoline, but if you put dino skips side by side with this new trick, then this is what happens. Any percent now had an almost 10-second time save, and fittingly, it would be given the name DSS, which stands for Dino Skip Skip. The trick was difficult and precise, but since it was at the beginning of the run, players could easily reset and try again. Not to mention that getting the trick second try would still save a few seconds over doing Dino Skip. Even with this massive trick being discovered, Tyrone's record would stay on top all throughout 2019 and even into 2020. That's how good the 58.47 was. With it now being 4 months since Tyrone got his record, any percent seemed to have truly died, but in February of 2020, Mitch came back to any percent with DSS in his arsenal. First he got a 58.44, then a 58.42, and finally a 59.39, all within the span of 24 hours. 2 weeks later, Tyrone clapped back with a 58.36, and after another 2 weeks, Mitch would clap back it again. As the months would pass, Tyrone and Mitch would continue to trade world record back and forth, achieving times that were not thought to have even been possible given the current strats. Their execution was simply unmatched by any player in the world, but with the world entering a lockdown, maybe one of these top level players could pour in enough time to beat Tyrone and Mitch. With all of these optimizations starting to add up, 57 was already on the horizon, given that it was 14 seconds away. Nonetheless, these 14 seconds were going to be insanely difficult to shave off, especially with current strats. Come May of 2020, and what arose was a potentially huge change to any percent. In the BTT, most of the kingdoms actually follow the same route as what the world record does. However, a few kingdoms have different routes, and one of these kingdoms would be none other than Luncheon. When it came to Luncheon, players would collect a few story moons. First, they do Spewer, then this cheese moon, and then they end off the kingdom with this multi-moon. In the BTT, all of these story moons are skipped. This route was easily 10 plus seconds faster, but there was one problem with it, and that was the cheese room moon. Not only is the frame window for this roll cancel super tight, but the cheese moon itself is very arduous as the Pan Bros pans aren't consistent, meaning that luck is a factor as well, but the community had a solution to this. Instead of collecting the cheese moon, you'd instead collect the shot moon, which is convenient as it is right in between these turnip moons and the crate moon. You'd still have to do this triple jump to avoid Spewer, this even harder triple jump that is only possible thanks to these random invisible blocks being here, and if you want to save time with the route, then you need to have top-notch execution. But if you could do all of that, then you would be lucky to squeeze out a few seconds over the old luncheon route that was much easier. So with 57 on the horizon, Mitch and Tyrone took a crack at this route as it was most likely their only opportunity to make 57 realistic. Around the same time, everyone started doing a different route in sand. Instead of doing Jaxie's skip with the bullet bill, players would do the moons in the reverse order, which made for an easy 2 seconds of time save. 57, while far away, was starting to look more realistic. By the end of May, Tyrone was back on top with a time of 58:11, and while this run had some glaring time save, it would still stand for months. Even with an entire summer of being on lockdown, the world record would remain stagnant. That was until the very end of July.
Oh my god! Oh my god, I did it! Ah! Oh.
For the rest of 2020, Mitch would be on top with a 57-54. After Mitch got his record, Tyrone would get a 57 of his own, but for the first time in a while, he was satisfied with not having the record because even he knew that 57, let alone Mitch's record, was simply insane. But just because this was the last 2020 world record doesn't exactly mean that the game was inactive during this time. What's so beautiful about Mario's moveset being complex is the fact that anytime players feel as though they've ran out of new tricks, they can always go back to the lab and improve their execution alongside their movement. Since we will most likely never see perfect execution within a Mario Odyssey speedrun, there will always be room to improve it, even if it becomes more difficult to improve over time. While perfection will never be attainable, 2021 was a bound, and Tyrone was back to any percent. When Mitch got his record, both Tyrone and Mitch had a sob that was in the mid 57 2x range. Now Tyrone had a 5709 sob, because he knew that if he was going to have any chance at beating Mitch, then he was going to have to go back to the lab in every single kingdom and bring his times down for each one. On January 15th, Tyrone would finally be back on top with a 57-46. Once again, Mitch and Tyrone would battle it out, trading world record after world record, but on April 30th, Mitch would once again prevail with a time of 57-35. While execution was obviously stronger now, there are a few important details to note here. Up until now, there's a trick that players had been doing ever since the conception of 1.3. Before starting a run, players will go into the switches menu and set the time to 1:53 a.m. Once they enter Sand Kingdom, they plant the seed in the pot. Usually it would take 20 minutes for the seed to grow, but since the time was set to 1:53 a.m. on daylight savings, what will happen is that the clock will go from 1:59 a.m. to 3 a.m., tricking the game into thinking an hour has passed, which then makes the seed grow instantaneously. Because top level runners would enter Sand Kingdom at 1:58 a.m., they would add an offset so that way they could plant the seed at the right time, which is 1:59 a.m. The only problem here is that the order in which the moons are collected is 2 seconds slower than the fastest town route, which is to collect the seed after the shop rather than before it. Collecting these moons in the reverse order was definitely harder, but it was nothing in comparison to a bunch of other strategies that were already in the run. The reason as to why this wasn't added into runs for so long was the simple fact that you'd have to wait an additional 10 to 15 seconds before starting your run, because since you're collecting the seed moon sooner, your offset before you start the run becomes larger. The only workaround to this wait time would be to optimize cap and cascade enough to the point where the clock can be set to 1:54 a.m., but even in the present day, we are nowhere near close to that being a reality. So Tyrone and Mitch finally decided to bite the bullet and add this 2-second time save into runs, even though it would mean more waiting time in between attempts. In addition to Reverse Town, 2 more 2-second time saves would make their way into world records. In Metro Kingdom, the last 2 moons you collect are in the sub area with these NPCs, and if you get the lever moon first, then the movement here is pretty straightforward. It was thought that the timer on the lever was too tight to have enough time to collect both moons, but with this tight triple jump, you are able to barely pull it off. In Bowser's Kingdom, it was discovered that you could get one of Harriet's bombs to float like this. This happens when one of her bombs collides with the other in midair, and it's useful because on Harriet's second phase, you can immediately get a hit on her. But since all of these time saves and more were in Mitch's 57:35, Tyrone was either going to have to edge out the world record, or he was going to have to add a strategy that no one has ever done in runs before.
I have a subsidy, let's go.
This is 2DSS, otherwise known as 2D section skip. Not only is it super impressive to watch, but it is even more impressive to pull off, especially given the nerves players experience right at the end of these runs. But how the hell is this even possible? Well, you'll notice that these jumps are happening near the edges of these walls. That is because there are small and invisible fragments sticking out on both sides of the wall's edges. After you exit the 2D section, these fragments break in chunks, which allows for the walls to collapse in conjunction with everything else behind you. So if the 2D section hasn't fallen down yet, then you are able to take advantage of these fragments, allowing for you to save 7 seconds if done on the first try. Tyrone had been practicing 2DSS, and he vowed to start going for it when the run needed it to set a world record, which is exactly why the 57:31 happened in the first place. But since the trick was now in a record, Tyrone would start doing it on almost every single run, and as a result, he got both a 57:27 and a 57:25, all within the same month. Come October 2021, and while the record was still a 57:25, a new trick had been discovered in the Seaside Kingdom. If you swim behind this chest and then shake at the right time, you're able to clip straight through this wall as the chest opening will push you out of bounds. From there, you can collect both of these moons and continue on with the route as normal. This was a big discovery because not only did it save 5 seconds, but it was also easy to implement into runs. But even with a new and exciting time save, records would once again remain stagnant. Mitch was no longer playing the game, and while other people were getting better at the game, there were still no new world record contenders. Tyrone was the only one who was capable of sailing the ship. Mitch was the only person who was capable of beating Tyrone, but now that he was gone, the only person who was capable of beating Tyrone, let alone getting 56, was Tyrone. The problem with the next minute barrier is that these 14 seconds that needed to be saved were going to be the most difficult 14 seconds of time save the game had ever seen up until this point. If the community could better understand tricks that had already been discovered, such as this roll cancel clip in Luncheon or this clip in Snow Kingdom, then 56 would be much more plausible. But then out of nowhere, a new trick in the Sand Kingdom was discovered, and it was an easy one at that. Using a ledge grab and a well-timed cap throw, this platform is able to put you straight through the wall. From there, you can get these 3 moons, which would replace having to roll all the way over to the Oasis to get these 3 moons. If done optimally, this trick saved 6 to 7 seconds, which was just enough to make 56 realistically possible. Tyrone immediately got to work, and on April 28th of 2022, he would get the first ever 57OX, getting a time of 57:09. While he lost 6 seconds in the Luncheon Kingdom, the rest of the run was immaculate. That was, with the exception of Sand. He may have only lost 1 second to his gold in Sand, but the reality was that he lost about 4 seconds here. Platform clip in itself is a trick that just about anybody can perform, but if you want to capitalize on its full time save, then the platform needs to be right next to the wall when when you ledge grab. It sounds simple enough, but since the platform's position is reliant on where the camera is facing, it can be difficult to have the platform in the same spot every time. When Tyrone got his record, he hadn't exactly figured out how to manipulate the platform with the camera, and so he ended up getting a platform clip in which he waited multiple seconds before actually getting the clip. If Tyrone cleaned up sand and luncheon, then 56 would undoubtedly be his. Tyrone had choked so many world records in the past, but when it came to 56, he absolutely destroyed that shit. I would say that this record made him far ahead of his time, but not even those words fully capture how legendary this truly was. 56.55 was the new world record, and for the rest of 2022, not a single person would get even close to beating it. This in itself is one hell of a plot line, and I would honestly be content if our story ended here. But when 2023 rolled around, any percent would once again change forever. While a lot of speedruns are either movement oriented or trick oriented, Odyssey Any Percent was about to become both. Since it had now been almost a year since the last world record, all of these tricks were being labbed out, and among them was a trick discovered all the way back in 2018. This trick would be none other than the moon clip. As we know, moon clips are predominantly done using this backflip method, and because of this method, they are viable to do in runs as the frame window to clip out of bounds is very lenient. But when the moon clip was initially discovered, another method of doing the trick was discovered, and this method would be none other than the triple jump method. A few triple jump moon clips were quickly found outside of Any Percent, which immediately led players to theorizing ones that could be potentially possible within the Any Percent route. In Wooded Kingdom alone, 2 moon clips were theorized to be possible, which would add up to 11 seconds of time save. The only problem was that various people tried these clips for years, and while it was able to be done in 2-player mode, no one was able to pull off the tricks without the assistance of 2 players' extra mechanics. That was until a community member by the name of Rasco79 did this. After 3 years of various community members theorizing and attempting these clips, Rasco had almost come out of nowhere and proved them both within the same week. He even helped to prove this triple clip in Lake, which saved 4 seconds over Lake clip itself. If Tyrone could pull off all 3 clips in a run, then he'd be looking at an entire 15 seconds of time save. There was just one problem though, and that was the fact that the odds of hitting all 3 clips in a row was insanely low, especially when you pile that on top of getting the rest of the run right. But what makes these moon clips so much more difficult than the other moon clips? Well, when it comes to the backflip clips, you not only have leniency when it comes to timing the cap throw that pushes you out of bounds, but the positioning of Mario is also lenient. When it comes to, let's say, Maze clip, you have 1 frame to do your cap throw, meaning that the trick is frame perfect, or in other words, you have 1/60th of a second to do the cap throw. But even if you throw Cappy at the right time, Mario's position still needs to be correct. So not only do you need to do a frame perfect cap throw, you also need to do a triple jump that will give you the opportunity to even attempt the frame perfect input in the first place. The same can be said for the other 2 clips, with the only difference being that you have 2 frames or 1/30th of a second as opposed to 1 frame or 1/60th of a second. That is when it comes to the cap throw. 5641. The 5655 had finally been broken, not just once, but multiple times. Tyrone was not exactly satisfied with his 5641 though. While he pulled off all 3 of the clips, he went for one more trick that I have not mentioned yet. For the longest time, players in Snow Kingdom would get this moon the intended way, which involves capturing these 4 Goombas and hitting this switch. But in 2021, it was discovered that you can actually phase straight through this part of the wall. Usually this would be impractical as you become soft locked upon getting the moon, but since we have to warp to the Odyssey to get the last moon anyways, this trick ends up being super useful. The only caveat is that this trick is insanely precise. So precise that you can't just throw yourself at the wall and expect to clip in every time, which is why a setup was invented. The setup involves a very specific ledge grab, which is then followed up by lining the characters of the camera with this part of the wall. But even with this precise setup, top players were still afraid to add this in runs, because while you do save 4 seconds if everything goes well with the setup, it is very easy to just flat out kill the run here. But Tyrone decided that it was finally time to add this trick too, and when it came to his 5641, he missed the trick but got it on the second try, which lost him about 5 seconds. This record even lost a few seconds in Ruined Kingdom, which is almost unheard of in any world record, considering the fact that this kingdom is, for the most part, an auto-scroller. Tyrone may have gotten all of the hard tricks, but he knew that he could do better. Within the same month, he would get a 5640, but after that, the entire summer would once again see a lack of world records. That was until September 12th of 2023. Mitch had come back to demolish the world record one last time, but since his video file got corrupted, the record was completely unverifiable. So while Tyrone was still technically the world record holder, this 5628 motivated him to really grind any percent, and it would take 3 entire months for him to tie Mitch. 2017 and 2018 showed the endless potential Mario Odyssey had as a speed game. 2019 saw both sub-hour and 58. 2020 saw 57 and 2022 saw 56. 2023 saw twists and turns, but one thing was certain. 2024 would be the year of the 55 grind, and it all started with a huge discovery in Metro Kingdom. Using a backflip and a cap throw, you're able to use the Mecha Wiggler to clip out of bounds just like how you'd use a moon. From there, you could use the time in between the first and second phase of the fight to collect this moon that you would otherwise go out of your way for in Day Metro. Since this reroute also has you going to the shop, you'll save 2 seconds in Luncheon as a result of there being no shop text, which is then layered on top of the 5 seconds you're already saving in Metro. While this trick was harder than, let's say, Nut Clip or Chest Clip, it was leagues easier than the triple clips, and so Tyrone would almost instantaneously snatch a new world record, getting a time of 5620, followed up by a 5619 the very next day. What was once a pipe dream was now only 20 seconds away, and Tyrone was more determined than ever to bring the record down. This is where the world record stands today, and while Wiggler Clip is the last big trick that has been implemented into any percent, at the time of this recording, a couple of small optimizations have made their way into the run over the course of this year. In Cap Kingdom, you're able to do this spin throw against this block, allowing for Cappy to get stuck against it. If you then release Cappy, he will shoot straight forward into the frog, which saves about a second. Other parts of the game also saw refinements that I haven't mentioned yet, such as skipping the pipe in Bowser's Kingdom by doing this fancy movement, a more refined pillars, this roll cancel after you do Maze Clip. I mean, the list really goes on here, but ever since Tyrone has gotten his 5606, he has been pushing as hard as he possibly can to achieve 55 before the end of the year. Maybe Mitch will come back, or maybe another runner will finally catch up to and dethrone Tyrone. But as of today, 5606 is where the world record stands, and nobody is even close to it. So while this has been the history of Super Mario Odyssey world records, I have a question to ask you all. Will you be there for when 55 happens? And will you be there for when I take over the world?